Good evening, Jason. It's great to have you with us.
Always good to see you. How are you?
I want to move away from Orbán's somewhat ingrained reputation and perhaps the reactions that he evokes by first asking you to give us an overview of the political stance that Orbán holds in the EU.
So, I mean, obviously, Orbán is the outsider. He's the one that appeals to nationalistic populist sentiments the most. Yeah, but also, I got to be fair to him, is that he does have a base. I mean, within Hungary itself, he's won huge numbers in the local elections as well as national elections. In the United States, he's there now for meetings with Republicans because they do support him. So his base is outside of the EU, within the EU, and within his own country. I mean, he's not somebody who's just appealing to some radical faction. There is a strong base of support for Orbán, quite unfortunately, throughout the EU and throughout the United States.
And what is he actually trying to achieve by blocking further EU aid to Ukraine? Because he must have some kind of vision and idea about this.
So, I mean, I think Orbán at this point is just trying to play a game. Orbán realizes as the outsider, he has a monopoly chip that no one else has. He has the ability to offer his vote in exchange for something. Now, what that's going to be is quite unclear. But the EU has been cracking down on Orbán's regime for a number of years. The fact is that they have been accused of multiple incidences of corruption. They've been accused of a great deal of patronism and a great deal of trying to use their political influence or political power to float contracts to allies. And so I think at this point in time, what they're looking at is how they can use this current situation with Ukraine to get something out of it. And that's something abusive of what the EU system was meant to be. Of course, the EU system was meant to be that it would serve all the European countries together as a collective. But Orbán is taking advantage of that, as one would expect from him. And so I think we'll see that play out in the coming days.
Without a doubt, Hungary will want to get something out of this, but I'm sure that Hungary believes that there must be some strategic way out of the current situation that Ukraine is in with Russia. What do you think Hungary's vision is for this?
I mean, I don't really give Hungary much credit in the sense that I think that Hungary is the only country, that is to say Orbán specifically, to have met with Vladimir Putin in the recent past. Just last month, Orbán was happy to meet Vladimir Putin in Beijing, in China, and they had a long discussion. It would seem that, once again, Orbán has chosen Russia to be his closer ally. He has expressed that there is a lot of things in Russian society and Russian culture, as well as the Russian government, which he appreciates. And this all speaks to the fact that Orbán is a consistent ally of Putin within the European Union.
And this evening, we have heard that Hungary has secured 10 billion euros of development aid from the EU, albeit these funds can still potentially be blocked. Do you think that the EU is closer to securing aid for Ukraine?
I think that's much closer now. I think the reality of the fact is that the European countries are interested in helping Ukraine. They realize that somebody who's a shakedown artist like Orbán, and he's a typical, petty criminal. We shouldn't be very surprised. I mean, if it wasn't this, he'd be trying to do parlor tricks somewhere for money. And so he is once again trying to rip off the European people through his alleged nationalism. It's really not nationalism. He's just robbing the rest of the European Union for his country that contributes far less than many other countries. And so that's all there is to this, is that Orbán is trying to abuse and use the system as a typical person would when they have little to contribute.
Understood. And Orbán makes a point in saying that fast-tracking Ukraine into the EU may lead to negative long-term consequences for the bloc. You may disagree with the things that Orbán says, but do you think that there may be some value in that statement? There could be negative consequences in bringing in a country like Ukraine with the situation that it is in at the moment. What could those negative long-term consequences be? And if they would arise, is the EU able to handle them?
I mean, of course, there is a risk of bringing Ukraine into the European Union. But that, to be fair, is, I think, to be said of most of the countries that came into the European Union, especially those that are coming from the post-socialist areas. These countries are coming from an impoverished background. They don't have as much to contribute as let's say, the Western European countries. But at the same time, they have shown that they've shined. In the case of Poland, we've certainly seen that. In the case of a number of other countries, we've certainly seen that. So, I mean, the fact is, there is always a risk. But the fact is, the history of the European Union shows that when you bring a country in and from the post-socialist regions, they have tended to shine. They've done very well, and they've had huge turnarounds. So there is always a risk in life. That being said, is it worth the risk or not if it's going to be something that is beneficial overall to the European community? I mean, perhaps initially it's a little bit risky, but within the course of a year or two, usually the numbers start to turn around and you see that it is contributing its fair share and it's doing something that is really going to help contribute to Europe as a whole and its economy and able to compete with the international partners that are existing.
Has there ever been a country that has been given accession status that has been at war with Russia, though?
No, there's never been one country that's been accepted to the European Union that was at war with Russia. That is the case. That being said, I think that it's very important to note that there is not a state of war with Russia. Russia has never declared war with Ukraine, nor has Ukraine declared war with Russia. There is simply a special military operation, to quote Vladimir Putin, in Ukraine.
Significant attention has been placed on Orban as an obstacle in regards to Ukrainian EU accession, but there are also other member states that have shared the skepticism, namely Slovenia, Slovakia, Austria, and Italy. Where are they coming from in regards to the skepticism? Because there's a lot of attention that's placed on Orban, but they too have their fair share of, let's say, lack of enthusiasm. What do you say about those member states?
Well, I think that it's important to note that all these countries that have had a huge rise of nationalism, or populism, I should say, tied to nationalism, these are countries that, if we look at them overall, these are not political parties that won 51% of the vote. They are simply the largest in a plurality. So there is still a lot of room for other parties to operate. The fact that they did well, or the fact they win the prime ministership, is not indicative of the fact the majority of the country agrees with this viewpoint. It's simply indicative of the fact that they had the plurality, and that usually in most countries gives you sort of the right to get the prime ministership if you're able to make a coalition government. And in the case of what we see in the countries of Europe, it's the same thing there. So I don't think it's really sort of particular. I don't think it's really special. I think it's very normal for European politics.
But there is definitely a change in the mood, I would say, amongst EU member states. Would you not agree with that, at the very least?
Well, I mean, I think there's a change as to who's winning elections. But once again, the polling numbers in those countries indicate it's largely due to internal reasons. That would include things such as the economy in the first place, and it has as well as ties to migration. Immigration, which is the top issue in the United States as well, continues to be a major issue, and people do not like the fact that there is a lot of migrants showing up. They also do not like the fact that the national government, the federal government in the United States, is dictating to them what they do. In the case of the European Union, that Brussels is dictating to them what they should do. So I think this is something that's sort of universal. What we see on both sides of the Atlantic really has a lot more in common than it has different.
Indeed. Well, we're going to have to park our conversation there and leave it for some other time. Thank you very much for joining us, Jayson J. Smart, political commentator.